The thing about coming together, and this is the studies, especially with not only adults, but with children, there needs to be connection. And in a time of social distancing, we face some really awkward moments of how you can do that safely. And we're all in this together globally, trying to figure it out. But you know what? The Lord is not surprised. The Lord is not shocked. He is in control. His love will prevail as we look to Him. Relationships are important. So we're going to talk this morning as we continue through our series, Thrive, about health through relationships. So we're here in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, our opening text, the words of Jesus, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in His love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love is no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. For all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, He may give it to you. These things I command you, so that you will love one another." A powerful, rather lengthy passage, so let's break it down. Let's dive right in. Let's break this down. Given our context, here's how we want to open. Relational health with God is directly tied to healthy relationships with people. Somebody once said the world would be a wonderful place if it weren't for the people. Not really. The world would be an awful place if it weren't for people. God said to Adam and Eve, multiply and replenish the earth. You're here because you need to be around people. Okay? Or else you would be at home in your bubble listening to the small, frail Asian man preach the gospel. But you're here because you love to be with other people. And if we go back to this text, He said, if you keep my commandments, you will stay or remain or continue. That's what that word abide means. You will remain in my love, and this is my commandment. Notice He says, this is my commandment. In other words, we choose to do this, that you love one another as I have loved you. You are my friends if you do what I command you. And how did Jesus love us? He loved us selflessly and sacrificially. All right? Now, we abide in His love by keeping His commandments. So it's not how mushy we feel, it's how obedient we are. We do what He said. And loving others, according to Galatians 5:14 says, loving your neighbor is the fulfillment of the essence of Scripture. Loving your neighbor, all right? Think about that. So we cannot love God if we don't love others. We go 1 John chapter 4, verses 20 and 21, same author, the Apostle John, different area. He's in the epistles, not the Gospels. He says, whoever does not love their brother and sister whom they have seen cannot love God, whom they have not seen, and He has given us this command. In other words, when Jesus gives us a command, it's not something necessarily we'll do automatically. He has given us this command. Anyone who loves God must also, the imperative verb, must also love their brother and sister, right? We all been at home, but you better love your brother. You better take care of your sister. You don't feel like it, right? I grew up, I had a sister, and she was like a hemorrhoid to me sometimes. But my parents would say, you better love her. You better take care of her. And I did it because I was told to do it. And as I was told to do it, I realized she ain't that bad, right? So Jesus made us. He knows that sometimes as we choose to do what He says, we will eventually feel the value of that. It's always faith by choice first. So we want to nurture relationships with others. And here's the significant thing. Jesus is using the Greek word agapeo here, which was rarely used in that day. It was used, but not predominantly. It was more eros, which is erotic love, passionate love, feeling love. Like, Filipinos are very eros people. I didn't say erotic people. I said eros people. Like Mike Matias right there. Right? You're passionate, right? Passionate people, right? Polynesians are very passionate people. Asians, less so. Right? We're more an analytical people. So, agapeo means I choose to love. I don't have to feel to love in order to love. I choose to love because God said to love, and God will help me love. And that's a love that we choose to love because it's virtuous, it's noble, it's right, and it's selfless. Jesus was introducing this word in the vernacular by saying there's a higher love than even phileo love, which is we're friends. As I do for you, you do for me. It's a transactional love. Jesus was saying, no. Before I return to the Father in heaven, you have to, in order to work through health in this world, you have to choose to love those that are tough to love, right? My wife will tell you, I have been tough to love. A girl from Manoa marrying a guy from Kalihi is like mixing oil with molasses. Hard. But it's that choosing to, as she chose to love me, she became more like Jesus. Yes, sir. She's not here this morning. And this is not the online message. So I could say whatever I want to the in-person people. See, who is it that's tough for you to choose to love? Because we're not going to camp here, but stress and cortisol compromises our health if we hold on to unforgiveness, resentment, and bitterness. And in a time where we have had a lot of time to pause, and we may enter into another period of that shortly, we'll talk about that about the very end today. God reflects on our soul the need maybe to choose to forgive so that we leave health in our soul and remove all toxicity. In the same way Jesus says to choose to love, even though you don't feel like loving, you can choose to forgive, even if you don't feel like forgiving. And the feeling will follow the decision or the choice to do so. And it will keep us healthy in our soul, but it's not always possible. That's why the Apostle Paul said in the book of Romans, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone, because it takes two to tango. There's people I have not been able to make peace with. I've forgiven them. I would love to rebuild the bridge, but they still are not ready to cross that bridge with me, and that's okay. My responsibility to God is not for their reaction to me. My responsibility to God is that I choose to forgive them, and I say, God, help me to love them. That's the reality of the world we live in. Pastors are not perfect. There are people that hate us because we preach the gospel. We have to take stands that are unpopular. So we make enemies. Jesus had enemies, and they crucified him. Some of you are in that place right now. You feel like you've been crucified. Some relationships are crucifying, but let the Lord have those. Okay? That's going to be another series this year, but let's move on. Therefore, God calls us to love even if it costs, because love costs. I raised 3 girls, and by dollars, that's about $50,000 a year more than 3 boys over the first 18 years and 6 months. Love costs. But you don't put a dollar amount to love because love trumps all. So let's go here. In verse 13 in our opening text, greater love is no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. In Philippians, the great apostle Paul writes regarding the gospel and the sacrifice of Christ, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves, that each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Well, think about that. That's powerful. Consider others more important than yourself. Look to the interests of others. Value first what's more important to them. You say, I don't necessarily feel like doing this, but we can choose to do this. And what more important time than now? Right? So let's move on in our journey. Therefore, love is a fruit, but love develops over time, and God leads us into life experiences where we can choose to grow the fruit of love or embrace the fruit of self-preservation. So love develops. How does it develop? Love develops as we serve and support others. In marriage, I have grown fruit by having to live for someone other than myself. God uses the love of phileo and eros to draw a man and a woman together. And then you find out, when the honeymoon is over, it's a bunch of choices you make all the time. And then there's children. When they're little tiny, they're crib, you're born, you get the balloons, you get the flowers, you get the money, you get the card. And, for the first few years, it's so cute. And then they actually become people. They have a brain, they think, they talk, they respond. It's a choice. And we find that selflessness must rule over selfishness, and therefore, again, in the book of Galatians, the summary of all of the fulfillment of God's law that moves his heart and pleases his soul, through love, serve one another, for the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus loved us, therefore he gave his life for us. We've talked about this, that Jesus, when he went to the cross, being fully God and fully man, had to become sin for us. It's not that he felt like going to the cross. Hear me, everyone. Jesus did not feel like going to the cross because he would become the sin of all of mankind. The very thing he despised that caused the Father to give his only Son, Jesus would have to become the embodiment of sin. He who knew no sin became sin to give us righteousness for all. Think about that. Do you think he felt like it emotionally in his humanity and his divinity? Absolutely not. You wouldn't. But he did it because he agapeoed us. He loved at a higher level. He says, what's good for them is more important than what's good for me. The Apostle Paul said the same thing. It's better for me that I go to heaven after being stoned so many times and persecuted. This thing is painful, but the Lord has shown me it's better for you that I stay and I will remain. Therefore, I'll get out of this prison again. You talk about, he had the first prison ministry. And he said, what's better for you? I have learned in following the Lord that his favor, his blessing follows me as I serve you. And throughout a pandemic era, as we go through this season as a global community right now, this mindset is important. Mother Teresa said about the world, I mean, you talk about this diminutive, late, tiny little lady. She said, you don't have to love many, just love one. Find a way to serve one, she said. And just think about what the world would be like if everybody on the planet served somebody other than themselves. Think about that, right? But what we have during a pandemic sometimes, I mean, you hear people, because undoubtedly it's confusing, they're a little confused about the guidelines. I hear stories about people, they're jogging in the park. They're walking, taking their Sunday walk. And people go, hey, put on your mask. Right? Or how about this one? That's not a mask, that's a face shield. But if you read the CDC guidelines and you look at the state guidelines and you're informed with the facts, you realize you're doing right. So what happens with a person like that? It's self-preservation, and selfishness is their main priority, which God looks away from. It's interesting. The Gospels say that the more you just embrace what's best for you, the less of the blessing he has for you. That's why his greatest commandment is to love your neighbor, which means we are selfless, not selfish. And the way we form that is through the action of serving someone else. Now, a good friend of mine is named Dr. Stephen Mansfield. I remember Stephen, right? He's come to us so many times. He's the voice of faith to culture and media. And you'll see him quite often at different times on Hannity, on Tucker Carlson, on Fox. He's also been on other outlets, both on the right and on the left. And he's been a very good voice. New York Times bestselling author, former pastor, a great leader. I mean, he's been around the world. This is his latest book, Men on Fire. And so I want to read an excerpt from here that I think illustrates some of this. So pretend I'm an English teacher and pretend on the eve of going to school that I'm just kind of in a faculty role here. And this is what I used to do. So there's this section here. He says he's with this white, nerdy history teacher. And they're going into an inner city school of all mostly black kids. And they're in a gymnasium. So it's a mass assembly. And he's a little concerned. Stephen's a little, because Stephen's, he's Native American. He's got some Cherokee, all-American athlete, football player in his heyday. So he looks imposing, but the guy who's been asked to address this assembly is this nerdy white history professor. So he's already concerned. He's thinking, oh no, we're going where? So they're walking into the gym, and he said, how would my straight-laced Professor Buddy going to hold anyone's attention in that barely controlled riot of a school assembly? Okay? The principal took the microphone and quieted everyone down. And then briefly but graciously, he introduced the visiting professor of history. Oh, how many of you know inner school people love to hear about history in a sweaty gym? No, man, we can't wait to get out of there, right? He says, I couldn't have been more uneasy if I'd been hanging from the edge of a cliff by my toes. And then Stephen Mansfield writes, then it happened. My professor buddy stood up and said, I'm here to tell you who you are. To which in his mind he went, oh no. Yeah, you go tell a bunch of black people, a couple thousand in a heated gym in the inner city. I'm here to tell you who you are, and you're white. You run fast. He says, I glanced to Deshaun, of course, right? Deshaun, Jamil. These are the classic names of the African American. Deshaun was the alpha male of the whole school. I could read his lips as he leaned over to a friend and said, I know who I am, you fool. Who are you to talk to us? He said, well, the history professor said, I'm here to tell you what people with your skin color have done in history. What followed was one of the most glorious moments I've ever witnessed, said Dr. Mansfield. He dipped into biblical history. White, nerdy professor said he made sure everyone knew it was an African who helped Jesus Christ carry the cross, and that there was a black man among the elders in the church at Antioch, the first great missionary sending church in Christian history. In rapid-fire fashion, my white friend said that the apostle Mark was from Africa, and Oregon from Africa as well. Oregon, one of the spiritual fathers, Augustine, legendary St. Augustine, was from Africa too. In fact, he said all of Christianity was set on its course by the fiery churches of northern Africa. One more thing, he said, Jesus. All black folk, all African American folk, when you say Jesus, no matter what they think, Jesus catches your attention. Jesus was from the Middle East, so he looked more like you than he looked like me, and don't let them tell you different. Now, it was at this moment that Deshaun leaned in. His long arms rested on his bony knees, and his beautiful face fixed its gaze on the professor and wouldn't break away. In fact, a few minutes later, he told one of his rowdy friends to shut up so he could hear. I'm telling you, it was a sight. So Dr. Mansfield was watching all of this. Now he says, Professor White Awesome didn't miss a beat. He kept machine gunning facts until he arrived at American history. Oh, now it's getting real. That's when he told us that the first patriot to die in the American Revolution was a black man. His name was Crispus Attucks. Sounds like a wide receiver, doesn't it? And he was a sailor who gave his life in a skirmish called the Boston Massacre in 1770. And then we heard about heroic blacks fighting at Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill and Yorktown and helping found our country. Come on, somebody say amen. Okay, so he said, if you've ever used a folding bed, thank a black man named Leonard C. Bailey because he invented it. How many of you had a folding bed here? Huh? Hotel? Okay, all right. So, if you've ever used a smoker, thank a black man named Maurice W. Lee. He's the creator. Have you ever used an ironing board? How many of you have used an ironing board? Yeah? Thank a black woman named Sarah Boone. And if you know anyone who's had their life saved by a gas mask, they should thank Garrett Morgan, the black man who invented them. Have you ever received a blood transfusion? Thank Dr. Giles Drew, the black man who created the method for storing blood plasma as well as the idea of the blood bank. You know anyone who has had cataracts removed by a laser probe? They can thank Dr. Patricia Bash, the black professor of ophthalmology who invented the device. And then he says, listen, nerdy, white, straight-laced history professor said, finally, my favorite, if you love potato chips like I do, thank Dr. George Crumb. What a name for a potato chip inventor. George Crumb, he was the black chef who gave them to us. Then he closed. I told you I came here to tell you who you are. Well, these are some of the people you came from. This is what is inside of you. This greatness courses through your veins, goes Go do things as magnificent as they did. Go serve somebody. And then the professor just sat down. This wouldn't have been strange, Dr. Mansfield writes, except for the fact the room exploded. Yeah? People were standing and clapping and shouting. A bunch were high-fiving each other. There were teachers in tears. That's when Deshaun, say Deshaun. That's right. Deshaun did something I have never forgotten. Stephen said, I thought he would just walk out. That's what I had done after every school assembly, he said, in my own life, get out as soon as possible. Deshaun, though, made his way to the professor. He waited his turn, and when the professor finally stepped toward him, Deshaun just shook his head up and down. You know what? You see that, right? The hood nod. Yeah, he said, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. He says, then he hugged the white man in front of the whole black gym. Hugged the white man. So I'm telling you, Deshaun, the coolness, put a full-on head laying on the shoulder, not letting go anytime soon hug on the good doctor. What did you just do, Mr. White Man, nerdy, awesome professor? When the two let go of each other, Deshaun looked toward me. I nodded, thinking that would be it. No, that wasn't it. Because the lanky kid then gave me, Dr. Mansfield says, a crushing hug, and I had done absolutely nothing but sit there the whole time with my mouth hanging open as the professor torched the room. Come on. Come on, man. What happened? You know, the Bible says greatness is achieved by serving others. Matthew chapter 20, verse 26. He looked at people who didn't see themselves as Jesus saw them and said, there's greatness in you. And here's what your people have done. They chose to serve others. Do something for someone else. And when you and I do that, greatness is formed in us. It's very different from someone who's in a park, who's not up on the facts saying, put on your mask. Care about me. See, and through this pandemic, if we're not careful, self-preservation, hiding in the basement, watching our distance, wearing our masks, and washing our hands will be our only legacy. That is not history. History says the church took risks and served others. If Mother Teresa was here, who's shorter than I am, she would say, church, do something for somebody, somehow, somewhere. But do something. Don't do nothing. Pandemic? You come to India, Calcutta. I'll show you a pandemic. In 1918, when I was a little girl, there was something called the Spanish flu. 50 million people died. This is not a pandemic. So go do something for somebody and change the world. And I don't know how she sounds. That's the only time you've ever clapped for me, when I mimic Mother Teresa. What's the matter with you people? Okay. Listen, let's close, all right? Now, I can tell you're gaining traction here, but if you go through the text, intentionally loving others produces the fruit and the favor of God. You know, this wonderful Mother Teresa, she was never about herself. It started with one person. And pretty soon she created a revolution. But she always would come back to that. You can't help many, but help one. And everyone will help one. We can change the world. And she did it in the toughest places of the world. All right? Now, we go back to our opening text as our closing text. If you keep my commandments, Jesus said, you will abide or remain in my love. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you should go and bear fruit, and that your fruit should abide, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. I believe the Lord's been pleased with us. He's been pleased with you, because during difficult times, we've done a bunch of tasks. And We're going to continue. We started by making masks and writing cards to first line responders. Actually, the last thing I heard was over 3,000 masks this church by hand made for people at a time when masks were rare and in short supply. All right? We work with Ron Mizutani and help to replenish the Hawaii Food Bank. We did that for weeks until we discovered that each dollar they use can buy a ton more food than we could just raiding Costco and Sam's Club and getting stink-eyed looks from people who thought we were hoarding. And so we changed our strategy. But we continue to give. You continue to be generous, okay? And then, of course, hundreds of fully loaded knapsacks and school supplies have gone out and are continuing to go out to the students of our communities because of your generosity. These are things that say we serve others beyond ourselves, that brings pleasure to the heart of God. Thank you very much. And then, of course, right now with the surge in the coronavirus spikes, although very few of them met them in the hospital because we have a small hospital system in Hawaii, we may be overrun if we don't slow this thing down. And so in our lobby, which has air conditioning and we can open the doors to let the sunlight in and the wind, we're becoming a blood donation center in September because we see the need. And many of you are signing up and reserving a. I've signed up. I want to be the first one. In fact, I've given blood before, and they're calling me every day now. They want my blood. I mean, I barely make the weight limit, and they want my blood. All right? See, but what am I saying? These are tasks because we care for people. Okay, we're not doing these to score brownie points in heaven. Okay, because that's not how the favor of God is achieved, but the favor of God is achieved when we love others. And whatever we do is tied to a love that goes beyond ourselves. So as we love God, we stay connected to His love. But the most important love is the love of relationships, where it's a connection. I was on a White House call in March or April with 800 pastors. It was President Trump, Vice President Pence, Surgeon General Jerome Adams. Of course, there's no conversation, but we're listening. And they said, a very important tenet, faith community leaders, you must always understand, beyond medicine and science, is that people live for connection. And social distancing does not mean social isolation. Do all you can in your churches to foster connection in a time of distancing. Be improvisational, be innovative, be creative, but do everything you can to keep people connected. That is why the joy and energy we feel about being together is a validation of how God made us for relationships. If I had to talk to my wife by Zoom, FaceTime, and Google Hangout every day, our relationship would be far less than what it is. We get to be together. Before I left today, I gave her a kiss on her cheek. Kissing a Zoom screen is not the same thing. So we know this is not sustainable. We know this is not normal, and we know God's not going to have us here forever. But while we have the opportunity and while we have day with a potential shutdown coming, make the most of it. And don't be afraid of the virus. Know that the Lord, as you're responsible with it, will protect you, and He'll go before you, and He'll use you in a mighty way. They say football is out. High school football, college football for the most part this spring. But as far as I'm concerned, that just gives me an opportunity to bring football into the service today. We're in the month of August when schools would already be playing high school football. And I've been able to connect with some coaches. And as you know, football will be the main sport in heaven. In 2006, I had as you know, I had the pleasure of being chaplain for the UH football team. In fact, this Thursday, kick up again, I have a role with being able to pastor the coaches of the UH football team. There's no football, okay? So Coach Graham said, hey, but we can engage discipleship. So this Thursday, 2:30, let's get it going. We have to do it by Zoom. They won't even let our wives come on campus. They want to sanitize the place for the potential return of students. So I'm looking forward to that. Amen. All right, I bleed green. I'm a graduate of the University of Hawaii, and I believe that there's nothing better on the planet. But in 2006, Coach Jones, who was here in the last service, he comes to the early one. I looked at him, and of course, this is so appropriate because I want to talk to you about a young man named Ross Dickerson. In 2006, the University of Hawaii sent 14 of its players into professional football. Probably the most talented team, Coach Jones told me right after service. He said, Norman, that was the most talented team we ever had. We never had the talent yet of the real big name schools, but we were able to play with them and beat some of them. Hawaii ended up nationally ranked that year and waxed Arizona State in the Hawaii Bowl. Well, Ross Dickerson was the captain of the team, St. Louis graduate, 5'10", maybe 180, 85 pounds, and he got hurt. And so Ross Dickerson, who was the starting slot back, a guy who catches passes, the quarterback was All-American Colt Brennan that year, if you remember him. And he had a record-breaking year. If he had gone pro, Colt would have gone pro that year. He would have been a first-round draft choice and instantly a multi-millionaire. He chose instead to play the following year just to finish out the career, and that's the year Hawaii went unbeaten and on to the Sugar Bowl. But the 2006 team was their better team. It was their best team. In fact, one of the most talented teams in UH history. Well, Ross, local boy, got hurt. And so as he sat out, a young man by the name of Ryan Grice Mullen took his place. Ryan was a quarterback in Louisiana, recruited into Hawaii as an athlete, had blazing 4.3 NFL level speed, but had to learn the position. But he learned it quickly. So while Ross recovered from his leg injury on the side, he watched as Ryan Grice Mullen performed admirably. I remember being with Ross in a room. I think he was sitting on a trainer's table, and he looked at me. He said, Pastor Norm, I'm going to give my position up to Ross. I'm told the position is mine. You don't lose your position by injury, but he's better than I am. And for the good of the team has got a greater chance at winning out if I don't play and he plays. And I remember being very moved. He's a young man. And I didn't say anything. Ross loved Jesus. He knows what we're talking about. He was very familiar with the passage I just read. And June had set a culture on the team that we don't play for ourselves. We play for the state of Hawaii, and we play for the brother next to us. And if we do that, everything else will take care of itself. And so Ross told Ryan, you're better than I am. You're faster than I am. This is your position. And for the good of the team, I get emotional just talking about it today. He says, for the good of the team, I want you to have my starting position. Well, the whole team was greatly impacted by that example. And the words we play for our brothers on our left and our right took on a whole new intensity. Ross said, I can do one thing for the team. I'll be a backup, but I can return kicks. Maybe that's what I can do well. And I remember being in Japan speaking at that time, and then I heard Ross was going to enter the game and return a kick. Here's what happened after he made that sacrifice. Take a look. Football in church.
Dickerson, one of the deep men back there. And he leads the whack in returns. He'll get it. That is one. Coming out. Got a save. More than that, possibly. He's got Franks to beat. He'll kick at the distance. Touchdown, Hawaii. 99 yards.
Boy, you see why the guy's leading the whack in kickoff returns. All he had to do was run. They had it blocked up nice, untouched. Nobody laid a finger on him.
Jesus was blocking for Ross Dickerson. And I think the players, as he made his comeback, they determined nobody is going to touch him because this is the brother that sacrificed his own position for the good of all of us. He said, the one thing I can do is I can return kicks. He became a backup after being a starter. Well, In the end of the year banquet, I remember because UH had a fabulous year. June asked me to speak, and I remember being terrified. I walked in there, I went, oh my God, 1,500 people going to hear a tiny little Asian man who's good for nothing athletically. You know, and because they were having NFL players speak as, you know, in the banquet and everything. I said, oh dear Jesus, help a brother, help all of us, help people not to pass out, all right? And in that was the awards banquet. And Colt Brennan was the talk of the town. And I remember when they said, and the most valuable player for the Hawaii Warrior football team 2006 is Ross Dickerson, the backup, who gave away his position for everybody else. Everybody stood up. And it was an applause that went around the world. They thought it was going to be Colt Brennan, the everything. It was the backup. It was Ross Dickerson. And I'll tell you, I was so proud of him because he epitomized sacrifice. He epitomized, I'm going to put your interest ahead of mine. I'm going to put Ryan Bryce Mullen ended up in the NFL because he got a chance. Because Ross gave up his spot. Well, he became the darling of the team, but Ross graduated. The story doesn't end there. And he said, I'm going to serve my country. At a time it was very tenuous to go to the Middle East. He ran into the storm and he entered the military to serve his country. It seems like he was born to serve others. And I talked to June last night. He's still in the military, serving his country, going to the hot spots of the world. Ross Dickerson tells us what putting others before yourself with agape love means. Who are you serving? Well, in that banquet, there was a very obscure video that we used to profile the season for the team. It was a great team. I remember going to Alabama with the team, mighty Alabama, playing at Alabama where they cursed the chaplain's mother as you're taking the field. And they nearly beat Alabama. It came down to the last play of the game. Hawaii had a fantastic season defined by one word. If you love, you can. If you love, you can do anything. This took place in Kona. You've seen it before, many of you. But this is where it came from. And it set the tone. And we showed it to the banquet in the aftermath of Ross's award. It's about Dick and his son, Rick Hoyt. Take a look.
I can only imagine what it will be like when I walk by your side. I can only imagine what my eyes will see when your face is before me. I can only imagine. Yeah. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all? I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I can only imagine when that day comes and I find myself standing in the sun. I can only imagine when all I would do is forever, forever worship you. I can only imagine, yeah. I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all? I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only imagine. Surrounded by your glory, what will my heart feel? Will I dance for you, Jesus? Or in awe of you be still? Will I stand in your presence? Or to my knees will I fall? Will I sing hallelujah? Will I be able to speak at all? I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. Yeah, I can only imagine. I can only imagine. I can only imagine when all I would do is forever, forever worship you. I can only imagine.
Dick Hoyt was the dad. Rick Hoyt was the son. Rick has graduated from high school. He's graduated from college. He's a functioning member of society. The way dad and son started racing was his son told him one day, I feel alive when I watch people racing. And the thought was, what if we actually did a little race? And then he began to train for bigger races. As he began to train for bigger races, doctors found out he had a heart problem, needed an operation. And he said, I'm just going to give up myself, and I'm going to just try to get my son into a place to show him he can do anything. And so, but in the process of training, they found out he had a heart problem. And he said, the doctors told him, if you didn't determine to unselfishly try to train your son to show him he can do anything, to race, you would have died. You were headed for a massive heart attack. You can thank your son for being alive. So they eventually qualified for the Boston Marathon. Okay, that's the Super Bowl of marathons that you have to have a high qualifying time. He did it by actually pushing and pulling his son. Listen, you could put me on jet skis. I won't qualify for the Boston Marathon. And of course, they did 1,000 races together, raised money for charities, served the greater public. And then they had one more race. They started their Bostonians. The last race was after the bombing. Remember that? The bombing of the Boston Marathon? They had retired, but they said, we're going to do one more to show Boston, if you love, you can. And they left a legacy for all of us. Well, Coach June, I remember he showed me, he said, what do you think about this video? I cried. I did. I said, June, what is there to think about? It's the perfect video. This is going to be the 2006 season. And it was. But I tell you, it's our season. It's a video for the pandemic season. You know how we're going to get through this? You know how we're going to win? If we remember, if we choose to love by the grace of God and abide in His love, we can together.